Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Bechet, and this is the AAF Exchange, a podcast from the American Action Forum, where experts provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic policy issues. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. On this episode of the AAF Exchange, the Fed's next move, and an in-house disagreement on the proposed PGA LIV golf merger. Joining us to discuss all of this is AAF President Douglas Holtz-Eakin, and later on, policy experts Fred Ashton and Jeff Westling. Doug, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Finally, I get to do a podcast where Angela says, can't tell me I can't talk about sports. So, you know I'm happy.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Well, I'm chronically grumpy, so yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah. So speaking of grumpy, it's time for everybody's favorite segment, your reaction to something going on. So what's on your mind?
It's the National Assessment of Educational Progress one more time. Over the years, we've written a lot on the sort of poor performance of the K-12 education system and looking at 4th and 8th graders, and like a quarter to a third of them just are not getting educated. Well, we got more recent data this year, 2023 data, on 13-year-olds tracking the long-term trends. And both math and reading attainment was down. Math is down to the lowest level since 1990, so we've given up 30 years of progress. Reading's down to 2004 levels, so about 20 years of progress. This is just a disgrace, and what I don't understand is why there isn't more conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this matters for the future of our economy, especially as we're trying to compete in a global economy with other countries that have a lot higher education scores than us. But like, what are the main causes here? What's contributing to this?
I'm not smart enough to know that. I mean,
yeah.
we worry a lot about the recent decline being the pandemic, having the schools be shut down, working remotely. We saw drops most dramatically at the low end of the spectrum, so relatively poor performing students got much worse than the high attainment students, so they must be better able to work from home and do the education. But even prior to the pandemic, we had this sort of long-term failure to improve, and there's a lot of finger pointing about this. I'm not a K-12 expert, but it seems to me that we ought to have a higher level discussion nationwide about having our schools work.
Yeah, I mean, it matters, and I can't. And to your point, I can't believe that more people aren't talking about this, which is kind of astonishing in a way.
And it's in these data as well. If you go and dig through them, the level's not very satisfactory. Talk about the median or the average, as I did. But the inequality in educational attainment is astonishing. And we talk about inequality about everything, incomes and health and exposure to poor environments. But we don't seem to talk about the educational inequality as much as we should.
Yeah. What is there? Is it a geographic? Is it all across the board inequality? Is it a geographical divide? What?
You can split the data geographically. You'll get suburban schools sort of doing better, urban and rural doing worse.
Interesting.
You can split it north, south, east, west. You can split it almost any way you want.
Sure.
There's just big differences.
Interesting. Well, that's something that hopefully we start hearing a little bit more of as these numbers keep coming out and are not good.
Yes.
All right. Last week, as expected, the Federal Reserve paused interest rates. The obvious question now is how long this pause will last. Chairman Powell testified before Congress yesterday, I think again today, if I'm not mistaken. Do we think we'll learn anything on the future plans in today's testimony, or did we learn anything in yesterday's testimony?
Well, he certainly woke everyone up yesterday. He emphasized repeatedly that inflation remained too high, that it would take time for it to come down, and that if you looked at the dot plots, each of the members of the Federal Open Market Committee delivers 4 times a year their expectation of the level of interest rates in the future. If you look at those, the plot of those dots, it looks like there are 2 more hikes in those data. So on the minds of the people who are making the decisions are higher interest rates in the near future. That says July they probably hike. Maybe they go again right after that, or maybe they're going to do it every other meeting now. He emphasized we've done a lot. We're going to do more as needed, but with the pace of it may be more moderate, so it might not be every meeting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most intriguing things that came out of the reports on the pause is he's maintained unanimity again.
There was a lot of speculation by people like me that this was really a way to keep the less hawkish folks on board, take a meeting off, don't raise rates, look at the data, and see if they're right. They make their case, and we see some cooling. It didn't happen. So we got the May CPI data just prior to the meeting, but it was too near the meeting to change those dot plots, too near the meeting really to change the decision, because they like to signal what they're going to do and not surprise people. So if you go back to the April CPI report, we had this moderation in shelter inflation, which came down to an annual rate of 5.5% for that month of April. That looked like big news. That's been the source of a lot of the inflation pressure in the CPI. So maybe that's finally turning around. We can celebrate. And so what they essentially did was send the message they're going to skip a meeting and wait and get the data. And what happens? It goes back up to 7%. So I think, he got the unanimity, but he also laid down the message that we're going to be unanimous again next month, and we're going to go up.
Yeah, interesting. What's your prediction about what will happen at the next meeting? I mean, will the Fed raise, cut, or hold, do you think?
I think they go up 25 basis points. I think that's pretty much baked in the cake at this point. I thought they should raise at the June meeting, so that's my personal belief. My prediction was they wouldn't, and they didn't. I now think they both should and will raise in July.
Interesting. Do we know if they're still forecasting a recession here, or a couple of, later this year, or do we have to wait for the minutes on?
We have to wait for the minutes. What we've seen in the past 2 minutes that are out, so you're going back 3 meetings now, but the staff forecast is recession in late 2023, sharp decline in inflation in 2024, so next year. That's a sort of forward-looking view of the universe. Despite that, they raised at both of those meetings. I would be shocked if they didn't have the same staff forecast, broadly speaking, and this time they didn't raise. But the real news would be if you get the minutes and they've somehow taken that recession forecast off the table. If the staff thinks the economy is not actually going to go down, then the case for additional hikes is even stronger.
So one of the, on a side here, one of the funny takeaways I saw at yesterday's testimony was a few members of Congress asked him about his Grateful Dead concert trip, where obviously he was pictured there, but some members of Congress actually asked him about that in his testimony.
Fed chairs are people too. But we now have a Swiftie for AG and a deadhead at the Fed. We might want to survey the musical taste of the remainder of our policy leaders. What does Janet Yellen listen to? We need to know.
I mean, I didn't realize that economists left, were real people. I thought you just, did your numbers and that was it.
Thanks, Kyle.
All the digs you've got into me in these last few, I had to go there. All right, let's end with your favorite part, the trivia of the day question. The Biden administration published their 2023 Spring Unified Agenda, and it included high watermarks for both major and significant rules. How many in either category do you know? And I'll give you points for either.
Major or
significant is what they define them as.
I think major rules, they have something like 410 on the table.
Yeah, so they have 280 major rules.
Oops,
and
wrong.
then 1,326 significant rules is what Dan Goldbeck found in his insight. But
it's a lot of rulemaking.
I mean, it's just astonishing how much rules are coming out. I mean, you see the tracker, the Week in Regs tracker every week, and it just seems like it just goes up and up.
I'm astonished at the level of activity in 2 ways. Number one, there's just a significant amount of policymaking that's not being seen in the Congress, right? I mean, the administration is just doing it. Number two, they don't seem to understand the economic consequences of these increasingly heavy regulatory burdens. And that always puzzles me. This was true in the Obama administration. When we came out of the Great Recession, it's very, very slow, sluggish recovery. And they again and again pointed to, we didn't get enough fiscal stimulus, we want to spend more, And they didn't once recognize that they were raising stealth taxes by about $140 billion a year. If we'd raised taxes by $140 billion a year, I think a lot of people would have said, I'm not sure that's a good idea. But that discussion never comes up. So I think we're seeing the same thing now.
Yeah.
One of the problems for the economy is that if you put a burden like that on, the trend rate of growth goes down. So you're going to grow more slowly on average. And anytime you're growing real slow and you're near zero, something bad can happen. Next thing you have a recession.
Yeah.
That's a concern.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Doug, thanks for joining us for this first half. I'm going to go talk about sports in the second half. So I don't know how jealous you are, but I'm pretty excited.
You have to sit in a room with Jeff Westling and Fred Ashton. I'm not jealous at all.
Fair enough. Well, thanks again, Doug.
Take care.
Now let's bring in AAF policy expert Fred Ashton and Jeff Westling to hear their differing takes on the proposed LIV PGA merger. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Fred, it's your first time on the podcast, so we have to welcome you, and hopefully you're excited to talk with us today.
Very. This is a great topic.
Yeah, Jeff's been here before, so, and I mean, you're right. So this is a great topic. Finally, Angela cannot veto us talking about sports on the podcast, and we finally found that angle, which is awesome. So Fred, let's start with you. Walk us through why you believe the PGA LIV proposed merger raises some of those antitrust concerns that you outlined in that wonderful insight you did, and why you think the DOJ should investigate the transaction.
Sure. So let me begin with a little background for the non-golf junkies out there. So in 2022, LIV Golf launched a rival tour for elite professional golf. Now, the tour's relationship with the incumbent tours, the PGA Tour and European Tour, was a very contentious one. But earlier this month, the three tours made a surprise merger announcement in which all the business assets would be combined into one for-profit entity. Now, the antitrust concerns arise because this is a merger to monopoly. And Section 7 of the Clayton Act prohibits mergers that may substantially lessen competition or tend to create a monopoly. Now, keep in mind, there are very few details out there about the specifics of the merger, but based on what we know, one business entity will now be operating the three tours.
Interesting. So, I mean, yeah, it did really seem like it was a surprising, it really took me by surprise. I mean, I think when the day it happened, you ran over to my office, like, did you see? I'm like, no, you see what? I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, wait, where did this come from? But yeah, I mean, so, but Jeff, you have a little bit different of a take on all of this. It seems like this is a merger to a monopoly. If this is a merger to a monopoly, as Fred argues, why do you think this? Why don't you think this violates the Clayton Act?
Well, first of all, I want to agree with Fred to say that, this is something that the authorities should look at. This is one of those kind of transactions that does raise some competitive concerns. I think if this market is just professional elite golf tours, Fred's got a really good point. You're going from two tours to one, and that's something that would substantially lessen competition. My issue is I don't think that that's actually what the relevant market is. What we're talking about right now is the professional elite golf tours, but they're not just competing with each other. They're competing with a lot of different things to get advertisers, to get viewers, to get that revenue source. And what we care about with some of these transactions is not so much, let's define the market as any given product, but let's look at the competitive restraints on monopolistic behavior. So what we're looking at is, can a tour, now that they're combined into one, raise prices or lower outputs at monopolist level without any competitive restrictions, any competitive repercussions? What we look at in a lot of these cases is what we call the SNP test. It's a small but significant non-transitory increase in price. If the tour can raise maybe, like, let's say, advertising revenue or advertising costs for advertisers a certain amount, a small but significant amount, and they don't face any competitive repercussions, that tends to indicate that it's a specific market, that they don't have a substitutable product. I would argue that they can't do that, because if they do try to raise some of the prices, advertisers will go elsewhere. They'll go to baseball. They'll go to soccer, right? They got the MLS starting to really become popular. You've got things like professional wrestling, which I know that doesn't seem like a sport because it's not a sport. It's sports entertainment. But you have to understand that these are the kind of things that are competing. And so my point isn't to say that this transaction raises no competitive concerns. My point is to say that I think that there are other competitive pressures on this firm that makes me doubt that this is just going to be a market of professional golf tours.
Yeah, I mean, Fred, it does really seem like, baseball and golf season line up pretty, on the calendar if you look like it. So, it does seem like they're competing on all these other sports. So if the merger proceeds, as Jeff outlined, so what are some of the competitive effects of the merger? Are there benefits that will be lost by combining the tours into a single entity?
Now, Jeff makes a great point. I wouldn't be surprised if LIV Golf and the PGA Tour made his exact argument. But because of the way LIV operates, that being said, every player gets paid in every tournament they play. That's not the case for the PGA Tour and European Tour. Now, when LIV Golf kept poaching players from those tours, the PGA Tour was really forced to adapt because of those competitive pressures. They've expanded their player impact program from $40 million to $100 million. Now, this program is designed to compensate players who bring in advertisers and viewership to the PGA Tour. The PGA Tour created an earnings assurance program and travel stipend program that guaranteed a minimum salary and subsidized travel expenses, something the PGA Tour has never done before. And because of LIV's much greater tournament purse sizes, the PGA Tour responded in kind and boosted their tournament purses from $367 million to $427 million. All these changes were directly related to the new competitive threat in elite professional golf, and they could all be at risk if the tours are allowed to merge.
Interesting. Well, yeah, but Jeff, on the other hand, you've argued that there could actually be some pro-competitive benefits to that merger, What are your thoughts there? And also, do you foresee consumers overall benefiting or losing if the merger is approved?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one that the courts are going to have to look at as they're looking at this merger. And, I think Fred brings up a lot of really good points. But at the end of the day, a lot of the changes that the PGA made, at least from reporting, aren't sustainable, at least for that organization. So by merging, they're able to get more of those resources and can actually sustain some of those changes. Obviously, the tour going into one might affect the golfers in a negative impact, but you also have to remember that, like I said earlier, I think that they're competing with different entertainment options. And by merging, you're able to present a better product for the advertisers, for the consumers. Now the consumer can tune in. Yes, they have less golf tournaments, but every golf tournament that they're tuning into is going to have all the best players. Advertisers, if I wanted to reach an audience that, is going to buy the golf products, or maybe that specific demographic is valuable to me as an advertiser, instead of having to spend on two different tournaments, I only have to spend on one now. And that's something that's a competitive benefit for the process as a whole, because not only does that, help the advertisers and consumers, but that also puts competitive pressures on MLB. It puts competitive pressures on, soccer leagues or whatever entertainment options there are. So everybody has to improve their game. So those are the kind of big picture competitive effects that we want to look at when we're looking at these kind of transactions and say, yeah, there are anti-competitive harms here, no question about it. But we want to weigh those anti-competitive harms to the pro-competitive benefits. And I just think that there are a lot of things that come from integration that are beneficial here.
Yeah. So, it really does seem like, finally, that you both really agree on the need to thoroughly review this transaction and its impact on the market competition. That said, you guys differ on the merger's anti-competitive harms that would outweigh its pro-competitive benefits. Fred, just quickly summarize your case on why you think they do, and then Jeff, please, walk us through your case on why you think the benefits would outweigh the costs.
Jeff, all I know is this is going to be a great case for the DOJ to try, but to me, consumers will lose in the end. There'll be fewer tournaments to attend, less golf content to consume, and to me, elite professional golf is the proper relevant market. All the competition for ticket sales, advertising dollars, and television contracts, it will all evaporate.
Well, I feel like I've already kind of laid my case out. I've talked about the advertiser, I talked about the consumers. I just want to end on a little bit more of a happy note and say that me and Fred actually agree a lot here. And we agree that this is a case that the authorities should be looking at closely. We've written a lot about how some of the Biden administration has taken their antitrust enforcement and focused just on size and looked not at some of these competitive effects. But these are the exact kind of questions that these regulators should be looking at, rather than just saying, oh, we're going to go after this company because it's big, or this company because they bought bought another firm. We want the regulators to go and investigate transactions like this that do raise these competitive harms, and there may be a relevant market of just golf tours, and this would be a merger to monopoly. These are the really good questions, and it's just one of those fun ones, because if it's not the relevant market here, me and Fred can argue about that. We can talk about the economics, we can talk about the competitive effects, and those are the kind of fun questions that we should be having, and not just going to a big is bad style of antitrust law that me and Fred both have railed against for a long time.
That's exactly right, Jeff. Exactly right.
Well, yeah, you both lay out some great points in this, far more in depth on this than I am, where I'm just, watching the news coverage on it all. And luckily, as the moderator today, I don't have to pick a side between you two on who I think is right. We'll let the courts decide that one. But finally, before let
the listeners decide, Kyle.
Yes, the listeners are the ones that will decide. Yes, that's even a better point, Jeff. But okay, final question before I let you both go, only because I need to know what your guys' biggest takeaways of this past weekend's U.S. Open was.
I'll start with Fred. He's the golf expert.
It was great to see Wyndham Clark strut up 18 to a victory. I mean, the course is what it is, but West Coast primetime golf here on the East Coast was awesome.
Oh.
I would agree with both the statements there. Wyndham Clark started to look like he was falling apart a little bit at the end, and some of those big fairways helped him out, but it was great to see him pull it through, and you just love to see the emotion right after he hits the putt. But I think the bigger takeaway is that we need more West Coast golf, because starting a 6 p.m. tee time, you can crack a beer, go to the bar, watch the game, watch the tournament. Oh, there's nothing better.
Absolutely.
Listen, we can all agree on that point. Yes. I mean, there has to be one major on the West Coast every year for us where, I can leave work and I get the best golfers as I'm leaving work on Thursday and Friday. And then on, Saturday, I can go play my round of golf in the morning and then get home just in time for the big guys, the leaders to tee off. It was great all weekend. So, yeah, we can all agree on that point.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both for joining us, and we'll have to keep watching this case as it unfolds and maybe have you back on to discuss some updates.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kyle.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Tune back in for our next episode, where our experts will provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic issues. I'd also encourage you to check out any of the links in our show notes, and also follow us on social media to learn more about AAF. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play.